Welcome back, everybody. Today we're diving into a really, really heavy question, one that I think continues to haunt humanity. It's, how could a nation considered civilized commit the atrocities of the Holocaust? We're going to be using Richard Rhodes's Masters of Death as our guide for this deep dive.
Okay.
And not to point fingers or anything like that, but to really just try to understand the factors that led to such horrific events.
Yeah.
And before we even, crack open the book, I want to kind of just pose this question to you listening right now.
Okay.
What comes to mind for you when you think about the Holocaust?
It is a really heavy question, and I think so many of us struggle with it. And Rhodes makes a point right off the bat that I think is really key here, and that's this. The Third Reich, from its very foundation, was built on and ruled by violence.
Okay.
And on a scale unlike other regimes.
Wow. That's a chilling thought.
It is.
And it really sets the stage for what's to come in this book. Is Rhodes saying that violence is just inherently part of how governments function?
Well, in a way, yes.
Why?
I mean, throughout history, governments have sought to monopolize violence.
Okay.
They decide who can use force and under what circumstances.
Okay.
It's a learned behavior, not something we're born with. What's terrifying about the Nazi regime is how they twisted this whole concept,
Right.
blurring the lines between legitimate use of force and, systematic brutality.
So it wasn't just about violence itself,
Right.
but how the Nazis basically manipulated and escalated.
Exactly. And Rhodes highlights how this escalation happened in stages even before the Holocaust was in full swing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He talks about the brutal treatment of the Polish intelligentsia where, individuals were targeted based on their social standing or perceived threat.
Yeah.
Then there were the gas vans used in Poland initially against disabled individuals. Yeah. This was a terrifying early step towards the industrialized killing that we associate with the Holocaust.
It's like they were testing out methods.
Right.
Almost dehumanizing entire groups of people along the way.
Precisely. And, they framed these acts as necessary for the, greater good of the nation.
Yeah.
This kind of rhetoric paved the way for wider acceptance of violence. Rhodes also talks about the pre-Holocaust pogroms in Lithuania, specifically the one in Kaunas.
Okay.
And it wasn't just random mob violence. The SS actually orchestrated it, even releasing criminals to participate.
Wow. So they were creating the illusion of spontaneous violence.
Exactly.
To mask their own, calculated actions.
Yes.
That's disturbing how much effort went into manipulating public perception.
It was all about conditioning the population to accept escalating levels of violence as normal.
Wow.
And this is where Rhodes delves into the psychology of the people who actually carried out these acts.
Okay.
He introduces this concept of violent socialization, a 4-stage process.
Okay, let's break that down. What's the first stage?
Brutalization. It's exactly what it sounds like.
Okay.
Individuals are subjected to violence or the threat of it, often witnessing it, inflicted on others. This was, sadly, a common experience for many children in early 20th century Germany, often within their own families.
Wow.
It normalized violence as a means of control.
That's heartbreaking to think of that being a normal part of childhood. What happens after that?
Well, the second stage is belligerency.
Okay.
The individual grapples with their experience of brutalization. They're forced to confront the reality of violence, questioning their values, and figuring out how to protect themselves.
So it's like a period of internal conflict almost,
Yeah.
trying to make sense of a world where violence seems to be the answer to everything.
And for some, this leads to the third stage, violent performances.
Okay.
They act out, often defensively,
Right.
to prove they're strong and capable of violence. It's a twisted way of trying to gain control in a world that feels chaotic and dangerous.
And I imagine the hyper-masculine culture of the Nazi regime only fueled this.
Absolutely. Violence was glorified.
Right.
And individuals were rewarded for displays of aggression. This makes the final stage, virulency, even more frightening.
Okay.
This is where violence becomes more than just defense.
Right.
It becomes a path to power.
Wow.
These individuals become proactive in their aggression, seeking out opportunities to inflict harm.
So we have this society that normalizes violence,
Right.
coupled with this psychological process that can lead to its embrace.
Yeah.
It's a horrifying combination, and it feels like we're getting closer to understanding how the Holocaust could even happen.
Yeah, and you can see this play out in Hitler's own life.
Really?
Rhodes looks at Hitler's childhood, which was marked by an abusive father.
Right.
But what's interesting is that despite all of his rhetoric,
Okay.
Hitler never actually personally engaged in acts of violence.
Wait, so he was ordering the deaths of millions of people,
Right.
but never actually pulled the trigger himself.
Exactly. He was what Rhodes calls a desk murderer. This detachment from the act itself allowed him to escalate the violence to unimaginable levels. His own unresolved trauma, his own belligerence, fueled this need to dominate and destroy, which he projected onto the Jewish people.
And it seems like post-World War I, Germany, with all its economic hardship, feelings of national humiliation, was just the perfect breeding ground for Hitler's ideology. The people were desperate for someone to blame.
Right. Hitler offered a seductive, though incredibly dangerous solution. He gave them a target for their anger and fear, a way to reclaim their sense of power and identity.
It's a chilling reminder of how a society can descend into darkness when fear and resentment and a lack of critical thinking take hold. It seems like the groundwork for the Holocaust was laid through this complex mix of societal conditions and individual psychology and the calculated manipulation of power.
And this groundwork is essential to understand. It's not about excusing the perpetrator, but about recognizing the warning signs, the cracks in society that allow such horrors to occur.
So we've talked about this foundation of violence and the psychology behind it. But how did that actually translate into the final solution? That's a leap that's hard to grasp.
It's true, and what's chilling is how Rhodes traces this evolution. How a horrific idea slowly becomes a systematic plan. He starts with Hitler's early speeches and writings. Even back then, there are hints of his intentions, the seeds of hatred and dehumanization.
It's like he was slowly poisoning the well, drip-feeding this toxic ideology until it became part of the accepted narrative.
Exactly, and then you have Heinrich Himmler.
The head of the SS.
His role was crucial. What's fascinating is that Rhodes shows how Himmler initially even struggled with the escalating violence.
Really? That's surprising. You'd think someone in his position would have been fully on board from the start.
Perhaps, but Rhodes suggests there were internal conflicts. Maybe a flicker of humanity. But in the end, ambition and loyalty to Hitler won out. He became obsessed with efficiency and bureaucratic detachment. The architect of the Holocaust.
Speaking of efficiency, Rhodes talks about the Rome Purge, where the SS, under Himmler, eliminated perceived threats within the Nazi Party itself. That seems like a real turning point.
It was a brutal show of force, a message to anyone who might question the leadership. And it also proved that they could orchestrate mass killings, silencing dissent and consolidating control. Almost like a test run for what was to come.
Terrifying to think of it that way, a practice run for genocide.
And then the planning for the final solution itself becomes even more chillingly pragmatic. Rhodes describes discussions about forced labor, Jewish reservations, ideas that, while horrible, weren't yet outright extermination.
Like they were testing the waters, seeing how far they could push things.
Exactly. And then comes the Wannsee Conference, a meeting where high-ranking Nazi officials gathered to discuss the logistics of the final solution. Rhodes really lays bare the bureaucratic nature of it.
They're talking about mass murder as if it's like a shipping problem.
I know.
Or a construction project.
That's the horror of it. They're systematizing genocide.
Wow.
Discussing quotas, transportation, and even how to dispose of the bodies, all very matter of fact.
It's easy to get lost in the big picture, the sheer scale of it all.
It is.
But Rhodes also brings in the individual stories. Both the victims and the perpetrators. It reminds us that these weren't just statistics, but real people.
Absolutely. Those stories are essential to grasp the human cost of the Holocaust and to understand the twisted logic of the perpetrators. Rhodes talks about the massacre at Babi Yar, a ravine near Kyiv where tens of thousands of Jews were murdered over just 2 days. He describes the methodical brutality, the victims forced to undress, lined up and shot.
And it wasn't just the SS, right? Weren't others involved too?
Yes. Local collaborators and auxiliary police units. It underscores the widespread complicity. How this went beyond just a few fanatical individuals. It's a difficult truth to confront.
Rhodes also addresses the issue of Jewish resistance.
He does.
What stood out to you about that?
It highlights the incredible challenges the victims faced. They often lacked resources, even basic knowledge of what was happening.
Yeah.
But resistance took many forms, from armed uprisings to acts of spiritual defiance. It's important to remember that even in the face of unimaginable horror, people found ways to fight back.
It's a real testament to the human spirit, that even in the darkest of times, hope and defiance can exist.
And Rhodes doesn't shy away from showing the psychological toll on the perpetrators. He mentions Paul Blobel, an Einsatzgruppen commander who had a breakdown after overseeing the Babi Yar massacre.
Wow.
It shows the dehumanizing effects of violence even on those inflicting it. They might try to justify it, but the psychological scars are undeniable.
So even with these breakdowns, the killing continued. It makes you wonder, was it all just a matter of following orders, or was there something more going on?
That's a question Rhodes grapples with.
Yeah.
He talks about how the killing methods themselves evolved. Early on, they relied on shooting, which, while brutal, still required a level of personal confrontation.
Right, but that became inefficient.
Yeah.
And I imagine, too, psychologically taxing.
Exactly. So they shifted to gas fans.
Right.
An early attempt at industrializing murder, creating distance between the perpetrator and the act. Rhodes describes an eyewitness account of bodies piled into vans.
Oh, gosh.
Contorted and mangled faces bitten in a last act of resistance. It's horrifying.
It's that detachment, reducing people to objects that's so unsettling.
It is.
And those vans were just a precursor to the death camps like Auschwitz, where the killing was truly mechanized.
And that's where Rhodes takes us to an even darker place. He reveals how some perpetrators went beyond just following orders, embracing cruelty as a personal choice. He calls it malefic violence.
So it wasn't just about carrying out this horrific task. There was a genuine enjoyment of inflicting suffering.
For some, yes. Rhodes describes perpetrators boasting about killing children.
My God.
Making furniture from human remains, acts that defy any rational explanation.
That's a level of depravity that's hard to comprehend.
It is.
But it's important to acknowledge it.
Yes.
To confront that darkness.
Absolutely. One of the most disturbing examples comes from Himmler himself. Rhodes talks about a speech he gave to SS leaders justifying the extermination of women and children.
Wow.
He argued that sparing them would create future avengers.
It's chilling.
It is.
This twisted logic.
Yeah.
To justify unimaginable cruelty. This ideology of racial purity was so deeply ingrained.
It was.
It was like they truly believed they were doing the right thing, purifying the world.
And that dehumanization made it easier to justify anything. The victims were seen as vermin, a disease.
Yeah.
And as the war went on, the killing escalated. Himmler, driven by his fanaticism, ordered the destruction of the ghettos, eliminating any semblance of normalcy for the Jewish people. It was a relentless pursuit of annihilation.
Even as defeat loomed, they didn't stop. It's like the Holocaust itself became the twisted goal. A horrific legacy.
As one historian put it, National Socialism's gift to the world.
Oh my gosh.
And Rhodes reminds us that even after the war, there was no easy resolution. The trials of the perpetrators were often inadequate. Many escaped justice.
And even for those who were held accountable, how do you even begin to punish such crimes? How do you measure the weight of millions of lives lost?
That's a question that continues to haunt us. It underscores the importance of ongoing research, education, and remembrance, ensuring the victims are never forgotten and that we learn from the past.
Because as horrifying as it is to confront this history, understanding how it happened is crucial to preventing it from happening again.
Wow. It feels like we've been uncovering layer after layer of darkness, each more disturbing than the last. As we kind of reach the end of our deep dive into Masters of Death, I keep coming back to this question. How do we prevent something like the Holocaust from ever happening again?
It's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Rhodes doesn't offer any easy answers, but he does highlight the importance of justice and accountability. He discusses the Einsatzgruppen trials, where some perpetrators were held accountable for their crimes.
It just seems like a small step towards justice given the scale of the atrocities.
It was a start, but even those trials couldn't truly encompass the magnitude of what happened. Many escaped punishment altogether. And the very idea of adequate justice for genocide, it feels almost impossible.
You're right. How can any legal system truly address the loss of millions of lives?
It's a question that societies continue to grapple with.
Yeah.
And it highlights the need for ongoing research, education, and remembrance.
We have to keep the memory of the victims alive and ensure that future generations learn from this horrific chapter of history.
Because understanding how this happened isn't just about looking back.
Right.
It's about being vigilant in the present.
Exactly. And Rhodes leaves us with a final observation that at first glance might seem a little strange.
Okay.
He draws a parallel between the industrialization of animal slaughter and the Nazis' approach to mass murder.
That's unexpected. What's the connection?
Well, both involve the systematic dehumanization of the victim. They're reduced to objects, commodities. It's all about efficiency, distancing the perpetrators from the act itself.
So systems designed to minimize psychological discomfort.
Yes.
Whether it's meat production or, horrifically, the extermination of human beings.
Rhodes points out how modern slaughterhouses divide tasks so that no one person can say they killed the animal.
Right.
It's chillingly efficient and allows for mass killing without individuals fully confronting the moral weight of their actions.
And the Nazis, in their pursuit of the final solution, they did something similar.
Yes, they created this bureaucratic system, dividing tasks using euphemisms,
Right.
all to distance themselves from the human cost. It shows how easily a civilized society can descend into barbarity,
Right.
how the very tools we create can be twisted for horrific ends.
So where does this leave us? What have we learned from this deep dive into such a dark part of human history?
For me, it underscores the fragility of civilization, the constant need to be vigilant against hatred, fear, and dehumanization. It's a reminder that it happened once, and
Right.
it could happen again if we're not careful.
It's a call to action.
It is.
To challenge injustice and prejudice wherever we see it,
Yeah.
to never forget the victims of the Holocaust, and to make sure their stories continue to be told.
And maybe most importantly, to examine our own biases, our own capacity for cruelty. We all have a responsibility to work towards a world where such horrors are truly relegated to the past.
Masters of Death has been a difficult but essential journey. It's forced us to confront the darkest parts of human nature and grapple with the enduring legacy of the Holocaust.
This deep dive has hopefully left you with more than just facts and figures.
Right.
Hopefully it's sparked a desire to learn more, to engage with these issues, and to actively work towards a more just and compassionate world.
If this episode has raised questions for you or you'd like to delve deeper, we've included additional resources in the show notes.
The Holocaust is a wound that may never fully heal, but through understanding remembrance and action, we can strive to ensure that such darkness never engulfs humanity again.
Thank you for joining us on this heavy but vital exploration.